The average American family has 1.9 children. Now, this family does not actually exist. Not a single family in America has exactly 1.9 children. That average describes a group, but it doesn't really describe anybody in particular. We talk about averages like they represent something completely real and based in reality, but they kind of don't exist. The average describes everybody, and in doing so, describes nobody at nobody at all, really. Economic models will often rely on these averages, and they rely on this representative household. And this representative household has super predictable incentives and outcomes and consumption and adjustments that they make in their lifestyles are completely rational to both rates and risk and yeah, consumption, everything like that is all completely rational and very average. This is really clean and good for economic models, but in reality, people are not the average. People have differences in their livelihoods and how they live than the average. So even if you are close to the average on income, you very well might be separate, completely far away from the average for your wealth or your debt or your job stability, risk tolerance, access to capital, how long you're going to be investing your money, things like that. So compressing the entire average person into one thing doesn't really make any sense. That average person isn't any of those things. Very, very few people are exactly average. So averages do distort reality in a way. Imagine you walk into a bar, there's 100 people. Every single person has $50,000. It's a decent amount of money, but it's not an insane amount. Now, say Bill Gates walks into this bar. The average person in this bar now has over $1 billion. But if you ask a random person in that bar how much money they have, they probably have $50,000. Just because the average person in that room has $1 billion does not really mean that those 100 people that have $50,000, their lives didn't change. Nothing about their lives changed when we added Bill Gates to that room. But it did change the average. The average is a lot higher now, even though that doesn't actually affect anybody. So the mean, the average, it isn't super representative in a lot of specific cases, such as this bar example. So mean is sensitive to outliers. I think that's one of the bigger takeaways from this is something like Bill Gates being added to this bar really distorts reality and makes you think that this bar is full of super rich people, which it is on average, but that's not true in a general sense in any real way. The economy is exactly like this. It's completely uneven. Everything that we say on average doesn't describe the vast majority of people. So, for example, they'll often say that like higher rates will reduce spending. And on average, this is true. But when you look at individual households, the vast majority of people don't really get affected that directly by interest rates. So people with like a fixed rate mortgage or no debt or have a lot of just cash and don't have like leverage in their life in any real way, they won't be affected directly by these interest rates. Although it will affect something like big corporations and people with variable rate debt, such as like flexible rate mortgages or highly leveraged in other ways with like credit card debt and things like that. So that idea that on average people will spend less money when rates go up, it is true, but it doesn't affect everybody equally. So looking at things like that and thinking will affect everybody in the same way is entirely untrue, and it'll affect people completely differently. In a high rate environment like that, some sectors will be affected very heavily, others won't be at all. And there's just a large difference between the headline number and the effect on any individual person or business. So investors will often do this to where they'll look at interest rates, for example, as a reason for the economy to slow down. If interest rates go up, the economy will slow down. And on average, that very well could happen. But if you look at any individual company, that could very well not be true. And if interest rates are going up, but a company has released some really innovative new product and they're having a lot of growth, they'll probably go up, even if rates are up as well and they'll be spending less money. That doesn't necessarily affect every specific company. So it doesn't really matter what the average is for any individual. And this is also true for individuals over the course of time. When you're initially right out of college, you'll probably be making a fairly small amount of money in the grand scheme of your career, and you probably won't own a house. You'll probably be renting. You'll probably not have very many investments. You'll probably be in debt, if anything. So you're not going to be very affected by interest rates. Rates are going to be one of the last things you're thinking about. Whereas when you're a little bit further along in life and you own a house and you're paying a mortgage on it, very well could be a flexible rate mortgage. You'll be making more money, probably investing more. You might be more susceptible to interest rates. So this could affect you a lot more. And the averages in economic models will affect you differently throughout your life. Not just interest rates, but anything that could be based on an average person. At one point in your life, you might be below the averages, and at another point, you might be above them. So looking at that average could be true for you for a point in time, but it most likely won't always be true for you. And just because I've been hating on averages does not mean that averages are unimportant. Averages are, in large part, the very best thing that we have. A lot of things are based on the average because there isn't really a better number for it. And if we're looking at like average job growth or something, that does give us a direction. It gives us the average jobs throughout the country. It gives us an idea of the system as a whole and how we're doing. Even if it doesn't give us an exact breakdown of how everybody individually is doing, it does give us a general sense of direction and how the system as a whole is functioning. So I think the best way of looking at this is the averages in economic models are maps, but they're not the actual territory itself. They're an idea of how everything's going without being how everything is going for every individual person and every individual business. So macro insights can be accurate and not describe everybody. So I think the biggest takeaway is just should probably it's useful to shift your framework a little bit away from this idea that averages are the be all end all and think more instead of like what's happening on average, think about who is affected by this and how sensitive are they to this and how is this being priced into the market. Because in any case where the average is a bad thing, there's probably going to be people that are benefiting or just less exposed to that risk. The economy is not simply one person scaled up, it is hundreds of millions of people all interacting and creating this complex machine. So, the average does tell us where pressure is building and where things are moving, but the distribution gives us a lot more useful insight and shows us what's actually happening on the margins. Because at the end of the day, the margins and where people actually exist is where things are actually happening, not at the average.